Ladies and gentlemen, when someone breaks your heart, they expect you to beg, to cry, to collapse in their absence. But what if, instead, you rise in silence? What if your glow becomes the answer they never saw coming? This isn't about revenge. It's about rising so high they can't even recognize the woman they once tried to break. The real confusion begins when you stop reacting and start evolving. Stay with me, because I'm about to show you how to turn heartbreak into your ultimate comeback and wear your crown with power they'll never touch again. When someone you trusted hurts you, the first instinct is to shrink. You question your worth, your choices, and everything you gave. But pain, when embraced with courage, becomes a powerful teacher. It reveals the cracks in your foundation, so you can rebuild with truth. You are not defined by the person who hurt you. You are refined by the fire they ignited. Let the pain shape your strength, not your identity. It's not about being untouched by hurt, but about not letting that hurt reduce your value. Growth is born in silence, in those lonely moments when you choose not to break. Queens are not created in comfort, they are forged in fire. That fire doesn't destroy, it purifies. You don't owe anyone a dramatic reaction or a speech full of tears. The loudest statement is your refusal to fall apart. While the world expects you to crumble, you stand tall, not because it's easy, but because you decided that your dignity matters more than their attention. You realize that some people hurt you just to see if you'll break. And the best answer is to evolve in peace. Let them wonder where their chaos went when you stop participating. Let your silence be a mirror. They won't like what they see, because you are not just healing, you are rising. With every quiet choice you make, you reclaim your narrative. You become unstoppable, not in revenge, but in rebirth. The truth is, pain either breaks you or builds you. And the moment you stop looking at what they did and start focusing on what you can become, everything changes. You begin to understand that closure is not something you get from others. It's something you give yourself. It's the moment you say, I choose myself, even if they didn't. That shift, though subtle, is powerful. You stop living in memories and start creating moments that reflect your worth. You stop repeating the story and begin rewriting the script. And in that silence, you grow roots so deep, no storm can shake you. You build strength from stillness and radiance from restraint. People will never expect you to rise with grace. They will expect rage, reaction, regret. But there is something more unsettling about elegance in the face of betrayal. When you walk forward with your head high, refusing to beg or plead, it disorients the ones who thought they had power over your spirit. Let them sit with their confusion while you move in clarity. Let them guess if you even think about them while you think about your future. The most beautiful revenge is a life that looks nothing like the pain you were handed. And the most powerful energy is the one that no longer waits for answers. You were not created to stay wounded. Healing doesn't mean you forget what happened. It means you refuse to stay in it. You turn your heartbreak into high standards, your disappointment into discipline. You learn to be enough for yourself, and in doing so you become magnetic. When you are whole on your own, no apology, attention, or explanation from them can touch your peace. That is your power. Being unmoved by their absence and unshaken by their return. You don't seek revenge. You evolve beyond their reach. You don't stay bitter. You build better. This is what it means to rise. Not louder, but higher. You'll confuse them simply by being unbothered, by no longer explaining your silence, by not correcting the lies they tell others. Because true power doesn't argue, it radiates. Let them talk. Let them watch. Let them wonder. You don't need to react when you've already detached. Emotional maturity is when you realize you don't need closure to move on. You don't need validation to know your worth. What once hurt you now humbles you. What once distracted you now defines your standards. And from that pain, you create peace. They can no longer disrupt. This journey is not about pretending to be fine. It's about choosing to be free. Every moment you don't retaliate is a moment you realign with your higher self. When they expect chaos and receive calm, they lose control. When they expect you to break and you build instead, they lose access. You become a mystery they cannot decode, because you're no longer operating in the same emotional arena. You're no longer driven by anger or sadness. You're fueled by vision. And that makes you unrecognizable to the version of yourself they tried to break. What hurts today becomes your fuel tomorrow. You walk away, not because you're weak, but because you're wise enough to know your energy is sacred. You no longer chase explanations. You create experiences. You no longer beg to be chosen. You choose yourself. Every time you put yourself first, every time you rise with quiet confidence, you send a message. They didn't break you, they built a stronger version of you. And that version doesn't need revenge. She's too focused on her rise. One day, you look back and feel grateful, not for the hurt, but for the strength it revealed. You'll thank the version of you that chose healing over hate, that chose growth over games. And in that moment, you'll know this was never about them. It was about your transformation. You didn't just rise, you reinvented. And in doing so, you became the very thing they can never reach again. Untouchable. When someone breaks your heart, it's tempting to center your story around them. But real power begins the moment you remove them from your narrative. You don't need their apology to rise. You don't need their attention to thrive. What you need is a shift from looking back to looking within. Healing doesn't come from watching them regret. It comes from watching yourself evolve. Rewrite the narrative by taking back your voice. This is not a story of what they did to you, but a story of what you chose to do with the pain. When you stop making them the main character, you begin to live on your own terms. The confusion comes when you no longer act the way they expect. They thought you'd beg, but you built. They thought you'd cry, but you created. They expected desperation and instead got distance. There is nothing more disarming than a woman who doesn't flinch. When you stop reacting, they start questioning their impact. That's where the power lives. In your decision to stop performing for their approval. Rise in such a way that they don't even recognize you. Not because you became someone else, but because you finally became yourself. That's how you take control. By shifting the lens from them to you. You don't need to make noise to be noticed. There's a quiet confidence in choosing your peace over their presence. Let your transformation speak. Let your growth become the headline. You rewrite the story when you stop waiting for them to validate your pain. You do not need permission to outgrow what once hurt you. In fact, the most liberating moment is when you realize you're done explaining. You're done proving. You're done waiting. The story shifts when you no longer ask, "Why did this happen?" and instead say, "What will I do with it now?" Living well is not about making them see what they lost, it's about realizing what you've gained. The confusion lies in your calm, the strength in your silence. When someone no longer has access to your mind, your emotions, your energy, they are left with echoes. They are left with questions. And you are left with peace. That's the gift of detachment. It doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you no longer feed what doesn't grow you. Every time you choose stillness over reaction, you gain ground. Every time you choose purpose over people-pleasing, you step into your true identity. There will be moments when the urge to prove something will rise. Resist it. Prove it to yourself, not to them. You don't owe the past any explanation for your growth. Don't rewrite the past to make them look better. Don't hold yourself hostage to who you used to be with them. When you free yourself from the version of you that tolerated the pain, you unlock the version that was always meant to lead. Lead with strength, not spite. With vision, not vengeance. Your story is yours now. And it begins where the need for closure ends. They don't need to understand your healing. They don't need to see your success. You begin to glow differently. You walk differently. You speak differently. Because you're no longer performing for an audience that never applauded you in the first place. You are no longer seeking love in places that couldn't hold your light. Your transformation becomes the mystery. They can't trace it. They can't name it. And they definitely can't follow it. You'll confuse them not because you play games, but because you stop playing altogether. You exit the cycle. You step off the stage. You leave the table where love was only offered in crumbs. And when you do that, they lose their script. They no longer know how to engage with a version of you that no longer reacts. You've outgrown the narrative, and in that growth, you become untouchable. Not because you're cold, but because you're clear. Your clarity cuts deeper than any confrontation ever could. Your peace unsettles what once controlled you. You take back your power by being intentional, by building a life that feels like truth. You find joy in simplicity, in boundaries, in solitude. You find strength in choosing what serves you. The story becomes powerful, not because of how it began, but because of how you rise through it. You don't edit yourself to be more palatable to the one who walked away. You amplify the parts of you they couldn't handle. You expand in spaces they never supported, and that expansion confuses them because they expected you to stay small, but small no longer fits you. You were never meant to stay in the version of yourself that was easy to manipulate. Growth makes you unpredictable to the ones who depended on your pain. They look for the old version of you and won't find her. They'll reach out expecting the same patterns and be met with boundaries. And in that moment, they realize the story has changed. The narrative is no longer centered on them. It's about the woman who walked away from everything that dimmed her. It's about the power that comes when you rewrite your role. You're no longer the wounded. You're the writer. This isn't about revenge. It's about redemption. Not from them, but from yourself. From the moments you abandoned your truth to be loved, from the times you settled for less than you deserved. You rise not to impress, but to reclaim. Reclaim your confidence, your joy, your future. You confuse them simply by being whole. And when you're whole, you don't need to be understood. You just need to be free. Let the story unfold without them. Let the silence speak your strength. And let every step forward remind you, you were always the story, never the side character. There comes a time when you no longer crave revenge but seek reinvention. The pain may have knocked you down, but it also showed you what was no longer meant for you. You stop looking at what was lost and start building a version of yourself that never depended on validation from someone who couldn't see your worth. You rise not out of rage, but out of self-respect. The woman who emerges from heartbreak is never the same as the one who fell. She's wiser, stronger, and far more dangerous to anyone who tries to treat her like she used to be. You stop trying to be remembered by someone who chose to forget you. Instead, You make sure the only person who never forgets your value is you. The person who broke you doesn't deserve a front row seat to your comeback. You save that space for the future you're designing in silence. The journey to rising starts with deciding that your energy is too sacred for confusion. You no longer want to prove anything to the one who left, disappeared, or betrayed you. You want peace. You want purpose. And in that pursuit, you become something even you didn't expect. You stop reacting and start becoming. The old version of you waited, cried, explained, but now you simply evolve. You realize there is no power in being pitied. There is power in being untouchable. You rebuild yourself with standards, not scars. You take the pain and sculpt strength from it, silently and intentionally. And the result is a life so beautiful, it makes your past look like a dream that no longer fits. Your strength becomes intimidating, not because you're angry, but because you're no longer accessible. The same person who once knew how to trigger you now stumbles over your silence. They don't know who you are anymore. And that's exactly how you want it. You confuse them by not responding, by not reaching out, by not returning to the version of yourself that tolerated the unacceptable. You smile in a way that no longer seeks permission. You walk with purpose that no longer stumbles over old memories. You speak from clarity, not chaos. And slowly, you build a reality where their opinion doesn't belong. That's not revenge. That's real freedom. When someone hurts you, they often expect you to stay small, to remain tethered to the wound, constantly spinning in a cycle of seeking closure or attention. But true evolution means rising so high, they can't find the version of you they left behind. You become a mystery, not because you're hiding, but because you've elevated. You no longer respond to confusion with conversation. You respond with distance. Your silence becomes your power. Your absence becomes your answer. And without ever raising your voice, you let the new life you've created speak on your behalf. The most powerful transformation happens quietly. There's no need for declarations or revenge fantasies. Just decisions. Decisions to stop explaining, to stop proving, to stop lowering your standards for anyone who couldn't recognize your light. The woman who emerges from heartbreak doesn't seek to be noticed. She becomes impossible to ignore. Not through loudness, but through elegance. Not through pain, but through peace. She builds a life that reflects everything she once compromised. And when the ones who once hurt her see that life, they no longer recognize her. Because she's become someone they never thought she could be. Free, focused, and fulfilled. There is something deeply confusing to those who expect you to remain broken, only to see you shine instead. They watch from a distance, unsure how to engage with someone who no longer needs them. They remember the version of you that gave too much, asked for too little, and waited too long. But that version is gone. She was replaced by someone who prioritizes peace over patterns. Someone who doesn't chase or beg, but chooses and builds. And while they wonder what changed, you know the truth. It wasn't one moment. It was 1,000 small choices to love yourself more than you feared being alone. When your life becomes your focus, everything else fades. The distractions lose power. The past loses control. You no longer revisit old conversations in your mind or rehearse imaginary scenarios. You start designing your present. You start falling in love with your own vision. And the beauty of that transformation is this. It no longer matters whether they regret hurting you because you no longer need them to. You've grown beyond needing an explanation. You've grown into someone who no longer questions her worth based on someone else's ability to see it. Every step you take in healing is a statement, not to them, but to yourself. That you are always worthy, that the betrayal was a reflection of their limitations, not yours. That you have always had the power. It just took a heartbreak to realize it. You stopped doubting your intuition. You stopped watering down your light. You stopped romanticizing those who only showed up in fragments. And as you build this new version of yourself, you become your own safe space. The love you once begged for, you now give to yourself freely. And that love is unconditional, unshakable, and undeniable. You don't need to announce your growth. The people who once underestimated you will feel it, not because you flaunt it, but because they no longer recognize the woman you've become. They will try to reach her through old patterns and find only silence. They will test boundaries and discover they are now met with unshakable resolve. They will search for weaknesses that no longer exist. That's the beauty of rising. You don't just change what's visible, you change what's accessible. You become a fortress of self-respect. And the more you protect your energy, the more unstoppable you become. Eventually, you look in the mirror and